what's the last piece of customer feedback you actually did something with? Not just read, but actually did something with.
For most business owners, the honest answer is never, and that's not your fault. When you ask something like, "How was your experience?" you get an answer like, "Great, thanks." And what are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah, you can't publish it. You can't fix anything with that. And you can't write an ad with it. It's a dead end with a smiley face on it.
But here's what changed. AI can now do what a good interviewer does, and that is read the first answer and then ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, so today we're going to build it live, a Typeform powered by AI that interviews your customers with follow-up questions.
And the email that gets people to fill it out, because 83% of people who get asked will leave feedback. Most businesses just never ask.
Yeah, then we'll put that feedback into practice on a new landing page.
Yep.
This is the Shift AI Show presented by Aweber. Does anybody else feel like that stinger goes longer than most and too long? Maybe probably cut that in half before.
I dance a little bit to the beat.
I do. You know what? I keep going back to it because I do like the little
the pulsing beat.
It's funny. This topic you brought this one, and I appreciate it. I love it. It got me thinking because we're doing more like guest interviews for the Shift and prepping those, and I am decidedly not an interviewer, like by nature. It is not my background, my training, my skill set. And it was interesting because as I'm like looking at the Typeform stuff that we're going to talk about today, it's like it's so good at like listening to a response and then asking a follow-up.
Yeah, it really
and
is.
I was like, in my head, I was like, I wonder how this could help me when it comes to like conducting interviews, because I'll prep like topics and research and like a line of questioning, but then I'm like, I kind of feel like I panic when somebody says something really thoughtful, and I'm like, well, I shouldn't just keep going with the questions. I should go deeper on this.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's what we're getting into here, right? Like essentially like interviewing your hopefully happy customers, or your, just your customers in general, to get their honest feedback and meaningful, useful feedback.
Yeah, exactly. I use Typeform all the time and do surveys all the time. So when this feature jumped in, it's called in Typeform. We'll be jumping in just a moment. The AI, I'm probably going to say it, Clarify with AI, I think is what the feature is called. Cool. It does just that. It helps take a vague response. It can take something like "it's great" and turn it into something that actually means something. We use this
questions, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've used this for a handful of surveys in Aweber to collect additional information and such. So it's a really awesome way to get more information. If you're someone who's been looking to add testimonials to your marketing or have some feedback from others just to help guide your material better, like this is something you might want to try out.
Yeah, awesome.
So let's dive in. Yeah. So we're going to just start off. Before I jump into Typeform, I'm actually going to be starting off in Claude. You can use ChatGPT or whichever AI tool is your favorite. But I am going to be using Claude here, and I am quickly going to be jumping over to our mega prompt library here, which if isn't shared in the chat, Jesse, can you drop a link? I'm going to be working. Thank you. I'm going to be working from these prompts right here that you can use to follow along. And I'm going to start with this first one to generate my questions. So back in Claude, I am going to paste in that prompt. And there's two areas that, hold on. I copied the wrong one. 1 second. Let me make sure I'm copying the right prompt here. There we go. So we're going to build the questions here. As you may know, I do teach Zumba. I'm a Zumba instructor, so I'm going to be using that business as my example here through this example. So I'm going to fill this out and just write, instead of I run Zumba, it doesn't really fit me. I'm going to say I am a Zumba instructor. My customers are, and I'm just going to put a one-liner here, say typically women over 30 who like to listen to good music and dance for a fun workout. So just a little bit of context. Context is key with everything. If you just paste something in, you're just going to get something back. So you want to give a little bit more here. I would definitely probably spend a moment or two longer here, but let's just go with this. And now this is going to build a 3-question feedback form for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. It'll give me a couple options to choose from, so I'm not just like stuck with whatever it brings back.
So just the 2 placeholders, right? Like there's not a lot that have to like modify.
Right.
There.
It's just like what your business is about and who your audience is. So it's going to give 2 questions. The first question is, it's not a scale ranker like 1 to 10, like you see a lot. It's kind of more about to understand how long your audience or the respondent has been doing this thing, to kind of give you context. Are they in
their level of experience, right? To contextualize their responses.
Feedback is so different coming from somebody who's been doing it for 10 years versus somebody's first day. Like that feedback is so different. So that first question is easy to choose one and move on. And then the second question is the one that helps get a story, get a testimonial. And it'll give you, as you see here, a couple options to choose from. So with this one, picture a friend who says she wants to try Zumba, but she's afraid she'll be the worst one there. What will you tell her? So it helps put them into a scenario and to be able to like answer a very specific question. And it'll give you a little clue here. Like this will pull out self-conscious fear, reassurance, and beat in their own voice. Another example, think back to right before your first class. What were you worried about and like what actually happened? So it kind of helps frame it. So the idea here is to not just ask, what did you think? Or how was it? The goal here.
Well, it's like we're joking about, but they are probing. They're not like closed response questions. Right. They're designed to draw out a certain type of response and answer that's more informative. And
exactly. Useful, and right? Hopefully catch a little bit of emotion, which is something that I think makes marketing copy better, right? If you can relate to your audience better, then do it. So this will help you there. So that's kind of the behind the scenes of this prompt that I've shared in that mega prompt. So if you want to try it out, feel free. And then lastly,
and share. So many of you are so good at sharing what you're doing, and I love it. But like this one too, like I would love to know how you're approaching your customers.
Yeah, this is a cool one.
And I think about it too, real quick before you move on to the third. With that first question too, I think what's so neat about not like like what did you think of it on a scale of 1 to 10? Like that's not probing because it's just kind of like okay. But what I like about their level of experience too is you might have a different kind of follow-up or second question depending on their experience. Like or if you're thinking about like somebody who sells products or something like that or other services, like you might, if they're a first-time buyer or a fifth-time buyer, you might want to ask different kinds of things of them.
Exactly.
Based on how familiar they are and because of somebody who's bought from you from 5 times, you can assume affinity is pretty high.
Exactly.
So I just think think that's such a better start. Yeah.
Cool.
I like that.
Yeah. I think I agree completely. You want to talk to new people differently than others.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do here is I am just going to copy and paste this. You can make adjustments. Maybe you don't like the 3 options and your goal is something else. You can ask for more. You have the context here to kind of work through that. I'm going to go with that first.
As with all AI output, always review it and make sure it's what you want. Bring your own taste and voice
exactly. And I did this a couple of times before this demo, and I've kind of changed how I talked about my intro right up there just to kind of get a better answer. So this was like a really quick one. Spend some time there if you feel that the output's not that great. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just copy these questions. So I'll just delete the other ones out of my response, but I'm going to copy all of them and I'm going to hop over to Typeform. Cool. So let me just switch my tab real quick. I am in Typeform and I'm going to click to create a form. And Typeform does have a really cool AI bot here that you can paste in whatever you want and it'll help you build a survey. So I am actually going to just paste in the results that I got from Claude. I'm going to remove option B and C here because I want to go with option A. So I'm just deleting that little piece and everything else is good. I think I deleted question 3 from here. Okay, now I'm just going to paste it in, hit go. And while it's going to pop up with like a review, show me thinking and stuff like that. But this has been really helpful just to get a survey up and running quickly. It's usually pretty spot on with picking like the right survey question answer, and it will actually default to the AI one.
And like how much of their AI functionality is paid versus like gated to a plan?
I'm not sure about the creation part.
I know there's interactive chat functionality, but then there's also that
The Clarify tool I know is
it.
definitely behind a paid wall. But there are, I'll show you an example of what you can do without that portion of it. I'll double check the Typeform chat. I believe the create part is available to everybody in the video.
I think it's just their new interface, right? Like most platforms
just like what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm just going to do a quick review here. So it's got my first question. It has my second question here. First name and last initial. And one other thing I did here on that third question is I added in a little line that's just like, adding your name here lets me share your words with other people to find out. So kind of like a little, I agree for you to share this information with people. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create my form now that I've reviewed it. And it's pretty quick here. I'm zoomed in a little bit, so it kind of looks really tiny. Let me see. Oh, it's better on a big screen. Look at that. Okay. So I have my form here. We have partial submits in here. This is also an upgraded feature, so we don't really need that. I'm going to remove it. But a great way.
That's like if somebody were to abandon the form partway through, it'd still retain what they had entered so far.
Yeah, right? You can choose which parts of the form you collect to. So I could put it after question 2. So maybe somebody decides and bails after giving their name. I still at least get the valuable feedback.
Yeah.
But I do know that is part of the paid plan as well. So we can remove that because that's just nice to have in this scenario. But I have a pretty simple survey here. And that's all it's intended to be. First one is the easy click one. Second one is that open field. And then last is just, hey, tell us your name. Now, two things I would recommend you doing before you share. One of them is to connect to Typeform. That's how you can analyze the results later. So easy to do that. When you get to the Connect tab, you hit Connect. Publish first. It's going to publish, and I'm going to just choose my account, which I'm just verifying on a different screen real quick. And now that I'm done, I can give my sheet a new name. We'll call it Zumba Testimonials. This is going to be crucial for later because you're going to be able to export those responses. So just sharing that there. And now my form is live. And I'm going to click share to get the link and show you how that AI follow-up question works because it's really cool. So let me just open up a new tab with my form that we just created here. And we can fill this out. Let me just refresh that real quick. So I'm going to fill this out. How long have you been coming to class? I'm going to say it's my first one. Picture a friend who says she wants to try, but afraid she'll be the worst one there. What would you tell her? We all make mistakes. Okay, we'll go with that.
Tell you what, I mean, it also like just it tells you a lot about like your customers, depending on what type of response they give there, right?
Oh yeah, it really does. And I think it hits in the feelings a little bit.
You can judge the high empathy, class attendees versus the low empathy class attendees.
Well, for me, I've talked about this a couple times. Like the thing about Zumba, which a lot of people don't understand, that it is like an emotional boost. It is about how you feel afterwards. So I always try to like get that out in my messaging. So this is, so helpful because it gets to those feelings. But I put this in here, and then automatically a follow-up question came.
That's awesome.
Relating to that. So what aspects of
just so I'm clear, because like I am new to this, like I've not been using this tool.
Yeah.
Typeform wrote this follow-up?
So here, let me back out a
you
sec.
dictate that follow-up?
Typeform writes the follow-up based on
That's awesome.
the first reply. So let me jump back into Typeform and show that a little bit. When you go to create a new question, which we didn't do because we use the AI builder, so I apologize if I skipped over that quickly. It's a type of question here.
So it chose to use clarifying.
Yeah, it automatically did that. Exactly. Wow. So it's a type of question. So instead of choosing short text or long text, you would choose.
It just captures, moves on.
Use the clarify with AI. And you can see there's a little sparkle on it. So what you do is you write your first question. And then what it'll do is take that response and then write up to 2 follow-up questions.
That's really, really cool.
And we do use this with surveys at Aweber as well. And it's really helpful to pull out.
Because a perfect case in point in what you put in there too, in your sample submission, like we all make mistakes. That's nice. But what are you going to do with that?
What do you do about it? Exactly. So yeah, so let me hop over to this tab real quick. That opens up the opportunity to learn more. Okay, let me dive deeper into that. What aspects of making mistakes in Zumba feel the most important to discuss? That's actually a tough question. And you know what? I'm going to skip it. I'm going to hit okay, which is going to happen. So you can give your name and submit that survey. This is an NPS.
And again, it had that little like disclaimer just to essentially ask permission to be using it.
Yes. And Typeform actually, they have an NPS survey running right now. So it's getting an extra survey at the end. But I'm going to show a better example because I think that will happen. And hey, prime example when these follow-up questions are not required. So it'll always capture that first piece.
You're not turning it into work for your
exactly
who are willing to give a response. But those who are willing to give, more probing responses, it's going to be much more useful to you.
Yeah. And here's an example of like a comment we get all the time. Like, it's great. Okay. Well, what specifically makes it great for someone starting out? The music is fun and people are nice. That's just like a lot more to go off of, right?
Yeah. I feel like I'm talking to a therapist. What specifically makes Zumba great for some? How have the people in class made you feel more comfortable? Yeah. Those are probing questions, right? Those
they are, but very helpful. Like you might not get everybody to fill out all of those responses, and as I said, they're optional, so you can just skip 1 or 2 of them if you want to. But for the people that do fill them out, and we have examples here in house that I wish I would have gotten prepared and ready, that just how it helps, like one follow-up question can just like pull out so much more helpful information. I'm going to just answer this one out. Made a ton of friends, which is great. Like that's the total thing, like something about Zumba that people might not think, oh, it's about dancing, it's this and that. Like, no, I made friends, automatically creates the questions. The one thing that I don't love about it is that you cannot define what type of follow-up questions to ask or like what direction you want those questions to be in. So like that mistake one, like that's a hard question to ask or to answer.
That's suddenly like if I'm the respondent, I'm probably like, peace. I'm out.
That's exactly like I did. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to talk about that right now.
I tried. But I wonder, like, so just to be clear, like Typeform has like a free tier. And they have like the conversational AI builder to make it really easy to build like more complex forms. You don't have to sit there and piece together all the logic. Clarify with AI, this tool that asks the follow-up probing questions, is a premium feature. And as far as I understand it, I think I think when you were showing it on the other page where you could like drop it in, I think it said that it was in beta. Is that right?
Yes.
So I do wonder if some of those things, like, having a little bit more control over what types of follow-ups it asks and things like that, maybe that comes in time,
Yeah, I agree.
Either way, such like a cool, useful tool to get. I mean, because we see this constantly where it's great to get reviews and feedback, or testimonials and feedback. But if you're not taking advantage of that opportunity and making sure that you're getting useful feedback,
Yes.
it's already what, I think you talked about it, like the whatever percentage of people are typically willing to provide feedback. Like I think it's like 50% of customers are typically like, that's a broad swath, but like,
Sure.
but if you're not taking advantage of that opportunity, that's 50% of people, what percentage of that 50% are actually giving anything meaningful?
Right.
Because you're not going to sit and do these like one-on-one interviews with each and every one of them. All right. So how do we put it to use? What do we do with it?
Okay. So we have our form, surveys ready. As I mentioned, work through the questions, make sure that the right questions that, work for you and your business. But now when you have this link, right? So you've got to share it with people. So I'm going to copy that link here. And if you already have an email list, that's a great place to start. You can do two different things. I recommend both. But if you're looking for like a one-off effort, you're going to want to create an email, right, that invites people to take this survey. You can do this as a one-time effort where you're like, I'm just going to do this once, ask for some testimonials to help me redesign something. Maybe you are just looking for testimonials to add to your website, or maybe you're looking to revamp a new promotion that you just kind of like want to catch feelings for, or something like that. Or you can set up an automation that automatically sends an email after they purchase a product, or maybe in my case, after they've taken a class. I can send this email afterwards automatically and just have this feedback kind of coming in, which would be really nice to just kind of have a flow for that. I did create an email here, and in here I have two different places. It's linking to this. I did actually use in the mega prompt, there's another prompt in there called generate email content. So to walk through that process here, I'm going to just in that same thread here, I'm going to say I chose option A. Help me. Oh, just going to paste in. Write me an email asking my customers to fill out the form. I'm going to paste that link in there. And it'll help you generate that email. You could use even like Aweber's newsletter assistant for this. I'm just doing it here mostly because it already has the context of my survey. So it helps keep it streamlined. I don't have to re-explain anything somewhere else. So I have an email draft here, but as you see, I had drafted one previously. So I do have that email ready to go. So just put that into some content and you can share that off. You can share that with all of your subscribers. Maybe there's a certain segment of subscribers you're looking to learn more about. Like I said, you create an automation. So when somebody does something particular, you can ask them how it went, but ask a better question, something that gives more meaningful feedback. Once you have survey responses in, I'm going to hop over again to my Google Sheet real quick. So in the beginning, we had connected our type form to this Google Sheet. So I have all of my responses here. And you can see all of the responses in the follow-up questions show in one cell. So you can see all of the answers in here, including the question that was asked, so that there is context in there, which is really helpful.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. So you actually understand what they're responding to.
Exactly.
Especially given the fact that some of those are not questions that you wrote.
Exactly, right? Yeah, you want to know what is the reply to it.
You'd really be lost without it, right?
Yeah, so all of the response in there, if they say, you can see this example here, that's where, somebody skipped, so they didn't fill out the extra question. So it's just one line. But what you can do next is what's really awesome and really powerful is you now have the words that people use to explain how your product or service makes them feel. And you can use that to generate social media content, marketing content, ads.
Well, that's the feedback loop. We talk about a feedback loop, right? We've talked about how on this show before, how AI can help you with the feedback loop. Where you're providing a product or service, people are purchasing, using it, reacting to it, you're gathering that feedback, and that feedback's then informing your landing page copy, your social copy, your ad copy. Um, but what's so critical about what this is doing is it's ensuring that to the best of anyone's ability, it's meaningful feedback that is actionable,
Right.
because that feedback breaks the moment you get, it was great. You know, like you're not, that's not,
you get a gentle pat on the back, right? You're like, okay, it was great.
yeah, but that's not actionable. So that's not a loop. That's just a linear, you know, sale to feedback and nothing to do with it. To keep that feedback loop functional and effective, you need to ensure it's meaningful feedback. And I love that, because this can inform so much. It can inform your messaging, your positioning, not just testimonials to put on the site. That too, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
But also how you talk about your products and services, and your headlines and your ad creative. I mean, everything.
Yeah. And I do have an example of that in play. Right before we jumped on, I did create, I think my dog is making his way to the door right now. I did generate a landing page earlier today. So I'm going to scroll up in my chat. In the Mega Prompt Builder, I did add a prompt in there that you can copy paste to generate page content. So let's do that. Real quick, I'm going to go back into the prompt builder and hop over into Claude, where I said it already has my email. It already has the questions and context of like what I'm working on. So in here, I'm going to say, actually, you know what? This is different because this is after the results. I'm actually going to start a new conversation. And I'm going to paste that in. So today I'm promoting an event on September 10th at 10 a.m. And just giving a little bit of details. So again, this is where you spend your time. The more details you provide, the closer to what your expectations it'll be. Promoting event, all are welcome, $10 fee. The rest of it's all here. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit run. So
does it have the feedback?
Oh, I forgot to give it the feedback. Thanks, Jesse. It's going to tell me.
All right, yeah. I didn't know if I was missing a step or if there's a connection there that, you know.
No, I'm going to actually add that in there. Sorry. So I did download the feedback. I'm going to actually attach it now.
And depending on what platform you're using, if you're connected to Google Sheets, you could probably even just give it the Google Sheet URL. Yeah.
I find that for smaller forms that works out well, but if you have like a large data sheet, I'm always defaulting.
It's a lot for it to break that, to cut through, for sure.
I'm going to let this run for a second and let my dog out the door so he stops barking.
And actually, while we're doing that, Ken had a not necessarily about Typeform and feedback loops, but a question related to email that I'll see if I can succinctly answer while we're waiting for this to run. But Ken asked, what's the difference between Facebook Boost or boosting content on Facebook or social media versus Aweber? Pros and cons of both. They're really two tools in your small business marketing toolkit. Boosting content on Facebook or social media can be a great, what we call top of funnel tool in introducing your content to new audiences, because those social media channels, platforms are going to use their algorithms to try to find people similar to your existing audience and put it in their feeds and expose them to your social media content and business and services and products. Great for top of funnel. Aweber is great for middle to bottom of funnel, which is like you've already got them in your audience, because Aweber is an email marketing platform. So what you're using it for is, maybe you use that boosted content on Facebook to send people to a landing page on Aweber where they will sign up. And, maybe it's like this, or there's like what Alicia's showing right now, where they're signing up for a free offer or some kind of value, and they're giving you their name and their email. Now they're in your audience. And you can continue to nurture and engage with them all the way from consideration down through conversion or that purchase point. So one is really about expanding your audience, and the other is nurturing your existing audience to customers. The reason that they both work well together is because for most products and services, it's a big ask to advertise on social or to boost something on social that says, buy this from me now. We've all seen with some consumer products that can be a super effective short funnel, using like Instagram ads or something like that. I am, as I've confessed before, I am a sucker for buying things that I don't need because Instagram knew I wanted it. But for most products and services, it's a longer customer journey and you need to nurture them. So it's easier to say, I'm going to boost this content and find new audiences and get them to sign up by giving their email for free for some kind of free value. In Alicia's case, often it's sign up and get your first class free. Mm-hmm. So she'll pay to boost content to audiences interested in Zumba, try to drive them to her landing page, where hopefully they'll take advantage of that free class offer and they'll join her audience. And now she has that. The other difference is social audiences are rented. For one, we all know the algorithms only show maybe like 10-ish% of your audience any given content. So you're not reaching everybody that's in your social audience. And two, they can take that away from you overnight. They can ban your account. They can, for any number of reasons, the great Facebook outage of what was that, 2023 or whatever that was, and businesses panicked. That is a rented audience that you do not have access to. You cannot say, hey, my Facebook audience, I want to export that and move to another platform with it. You're at the mercy of those platforms. With email, like Aweber, you own that audience. So that list of emails, that's yours to take to another provider if you want to. God willing, you don't. But you own that audience and that connection. You also, if you're with a platform like Aweber that has really good deliverability, you're actually reaching, 99% of that audience when you send. So I'm sorry, that was not succinct. I hope it was clear. I hope it was a useful answer, Ken. But obviously you can always reach out to help@aweber.com, which is our incredible in-house support team. And they can answer any other follow-up questions that you have on that topic. All right. Sorry, Alicia, back to you. We have our landing page here.
Yeah. So we have a landing page here made with content that Claude generated based on the responses. In this one here, I can show my chat. I did, I gave in the content there. I also gave some brand information. So it had my logo and things like that. A couple things I changed about it. I moved some images. Let me see what else I did. I moved an image around, then ended up getting rid of it. So that's all I really did. But what I love about this, I changed the header. It hits on so many of those relatable points as you go through the page. So most people here almost didn't come.
That's great. That's totally written from that feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's so great.
Come alone, stand in the back, leave if you hate it. Like just putting it out there, trying to like hit on those emotions that people
really nobody will mind.
Yeah. This happened to me the other day. Somebody told me before, they're like, I don't know if I'm going to keep up. And I'm like, you know what? Do what you're comfortable with. Hope you stay, but feel free to leave if you don't like it. It's not for everybody. Yeah. I understand that, but I'm trying to teach people that it's okay to try it, Everybody was nervous. I still get nervous when I teach classes to new people. So it's a real feeling that relates to the audience. It pulled in the actual testimonials from the sheet, which is really nice because a lot of time AI will generate fake testimonials. So now you have something to really work with. And it really hits on that, the emotional side of things. So I just love the whole thing from beginning to end is just like, get a vague answer, ask a follow-up, use that information for testimonials, improve your content. It could even help drive like a new program or a new course to offer. You could identify areas where people maybe aren't so happy. In a lot of my examples,
I was going to say that earlier, right? You were test driving the form and the follow-up questions, and I think what you said was like, it was great or it was fun or something like that. And I was like, what about it was great? Like if they had written, if their response there, and again, I think it's why I love that first question so much. Cause it's like, maybe it's their first time. They respond, "This is my first class," and they write, "It was really hard to follow."
Right.
And then it's going to ask follow-ups and probing questions about what about it was difficult to follow, and get to the bottom of it. Sure, you're not going to use that to write copy necessarily, or to use it as a testimonial on your website, but that is going to be, again, feedback loop is not just to hear like great things about yourself. The best feedback you can get is the constructive criticism. That's going to help you go, okay, you know what, I didn't realize, but I wonder if I'm approaching the class this way, or I'm, I think what I love, we were obviously showing a cycle where you're taking good feedback and reinvesting that in your messaging and positioning. But man, identifying gaps in your services or products or problems, it's just such a great tool.
Yeah.
There's so much more you can do with that, for sure.
And I feel like sometimes people avoid asking for feedback because you're afraid to get that negative reply.
Sure.
I mean, I am a product designer. I deal with feedback all the time. I hear negative comments all the time. And, it's hard. So some you take personally, some you're like, oh yeah, I agree. Sometimes you're like, what can I do to make this better? Right. It helps you stop and think like, oh, wow, they said it's too complicated. I never thought that before, but this person thinks that, like, what about it is complicated? That follow-up question could get that answer. What about it is hard? Maybe it's like the choreography was too complicated. That's way easier to do something with than it's hard,
Then it was hard.
You can learn.
It was hard, leaves you guessing and trying to figure out how to re-engage that customer.
Right, and that follow-up question helps with that, like, try to pull out that.
And those are opportunities for you to adjust your services, but also to like reconnect with that
person. Yeah.
I don't want to say disgruntled customer, but like, unenthused customer or whatever. You and I both work at AWeber, and like we've both been here for a while at this point. Our core values is to ask for feedback and listen to it. And it's funny because it was one of those things where like, I've worked with so many businesses that have core values and they're just like marketing language for the website, for recruitment or whatever. That is not the case at AWeber. And we really live out our values. And the feedback one is the one that, for me, even working in a creative world and having been so used to, critique is part of the process of design and creative. But you said it, sometimes it still stings, but you know what? More often than not, the ones that sting help us do a better job the next time or in the future faster than just the compliments, the great job, it was great, thanks.
The compliments feel good, but you learn the most from the negative feedback. You grow the most from the negative feedback. And you can design better products. Use it to connect better with your audience. And identify those pain points with them and help you relate to them more. So I think there's a lot kind of bundled into this, but a really cool way to like get better information from people to really help make your business better.
We talk so much about growing our business, and what we typically mean is like growing revenue and audience and customer base and those things, but like how to mature your business, refine, improve your business. Feedback loops are so critical. And I think this is such a great demo. I really appreciate you coming up with it and bringing it, because I know you've been putting it into practice and it comes from real world use. But we talk so much about feedback loops, but again, if it's not meaningful, and who has the time at scale to make every single interaction meaningful? You do a ton of customer interviews one-on-one, but those are time consuming. And you can only get so far with it. So tools like this that can help kind of scale that insight are incredible. Well, that's the show today. As always, if you try any piece of this, you put any of this into practice, please share. We always love to hear that. And if you're comfortable with us sharing what you share, let us know, because we're always happy to share it on the next show, on an upcoming show as well. You can go to aweber.com/shift. and you can sign up for our newsletter there, and you can also submit questions to the mailbag there, or not just questions, thoughts, things that you've done. Share anything with us there. It's a type form. I don't think it has clarify with AI enabled, so there probably won't be follow-up questions, but
an improvement we can make later.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's time to practice what we preach and maybe update that form. As always, we'll be with you this coming Friday again at noon Eastern time with a brand new topic. Alicia will be back with us, which is awesome. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited for it. Oh, and I'm sorry, I meant to say, to answer Coach Martin's question, all 33 episodes to date are available at youtube.com/aweber. There's a playlist for the Shift AI show, and you can watch all of them on demand as much as you'd like, and comment and interact. And we try and do our best to stay up to date there to keep it live and interactive and insightful. So thank you all so much. If you're interested in AWeber, our presenting sponsor, check out aweber.com. We are rolling out some incredible, Alicia, you should be talking about it, some incredible new AI builders, some of which you just showed.
Yeah, we didn't talk about them much, but they were definitely previewed here. Such an easy way, once you have the content, to make pages, make emails, make forms, just with conversational editing, write drafts. It's a great place. It's like a lot of fun right now. A lot of the features are really awesome. I'm excited personally to start seeing people engage with these features, and very excited to get the feedback about them. So if you do experiment with anything, share the feedback with us at the team at AWeber so we can make it even better.
I love it. And just quick humble brag on that topic. I think we're very conscious to not try to like just talk AWeber all the time, because we're very, let's call it, fanatical about the things that you and the product team are really, and engineers are releasing. I was doing a side project, and I promise I'll shut up. We're like running long today. I apologize, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm a big Dutch soccer fan. I was born and raised in Amsterdam, and I try to keep up with Dutch soccer news, but it's a lot harder on this side of the Atlantic. I'm outside Philadelphia. And so I was like, I want to create like use an AI tool to make something that just kind of like aggregates Dutch soccer news for me. And then I was like, well, that should be like publicly available then. Like, why limit that just to me? So I actually used Lovable, which we've demoed a lot on this show, to essentially build this thing that like reads all the different outlets and then summarizes it on another site. It actually translates it to English, which I'm ashamed to say is at this point in my life easier to read than Dutch. I'm a little faster. But here's the homework. I built this thing with Lovable, and I was like, this is great. I love it. It looks great. The design's nice, all this stuff. Then I went to build a landing page in AWeber's AI landing page builder for like a newsletter sign up for it. I wanted a separate page connected to AWeber, make it really easy. It came up with such a better design.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
And the way it positioned things, I gave it the most simple prompt. I was like, here's my website, dutchsoccer.nl. Make a newsletter sign up page for me. I think that was like all I asked it. It made these decisions about like how to communicate the information, how to preview like what the content looks like. The sign up form, it had as like the name placeholder, it had Johan Cruyff, who's like the best Dutch soccer player ever. I'm like, it just came up with these things, you know? So then I went back to Lovable and gave it screenshots of that new page, and I said, redesign this whole site to look like this. And now it matches the branding of what the AWeber AI builder built. I only say that to say like it caught me off guard. I'm a big fan of this thing, and I'm a big fan of using Lovable for so many projects. And it just like it kicked its butt, and it was it was such a fun thing to see, and certainly be caught off guard by. Yeah, anyway, if you want to learn more about those tools, go to aweber.com, and you can sign up for a free trial and check those out. They're a lot of fun. Just set aside some time, because if you go into that landing page builder, you're going to lose hours just playing with it and having fun. Thank you all so much for being here. Alicia, I will see you on Friday, and hopefully we'll see everybody else as well.
Yes, sounds great. Thanks, everyone.